something going on here.
Something haunted. Evil. It smells like death.
You might say a demonic entity. Falls under our expertise.
It's been 2 decades since Guillermo del Toro and Ron Perlman brought Hellboy to the big screen, ushering the Dark Horse comic book hero into the spotlight.
I hate those comic books. They never get the eyes right.
Despite being a masterpiece in Lovecraftian and fantasy cinema, the first film was actually a financial flop, but pushed along by DVD and Blu-ray sales, it earned a sequel that did considerably better, but also barely managed to break even. Unfortunately, with Guillermo del Toro and comic creator Mike Mignola then falling out due to creative differences, the third film was cancelled.
What's going on? What's going on?
I quit.
This opened the door for Neil Marshall's 2019 reboot starring David Harbour, which wasn't just a narrative disaster, it was a full-blown box office apocalypse. With the director often butting heads with the studio and the executives firing his cinematographer to send him a message, the film about Hellboy managed to set itself on fire.
See, I don't like that.
While there is a lot of love for the Hellboy universe, the IP has obviously struggled to maintain box office viability. The iconic character returns with crank director Brian Taylor at the helm and original comic creator Mike Mignola collaborating closely. Set in the 1950s, the Crooked Man follows Hellboy and Bobbie Jo, a rookie agent from the Bureau for Paranormal Research and Defense. While transporting a mischievous magical spider that derails their mission, they find themselves stranded in rural Appalachia. Instead of finding a charming little town with a diner and a post office, they stumbled upon a cursed region dripping with witchcraft, devilry, and enough demonic baggage to fill an entire season of Supernatural. Brian Taylor co-wrote the screenplay with Mignola and Hellboy novelist Christopher Golden, choosing to adapt The Crooked Man, a 3-issue comic miniseries. In doing so, Taylor shifted away from the action-heavy, large-scale fantasy plots of the previous Hellboy films, opting instead for a more intimate, horror-driven narrative. Many scenes are replicated panel for panel and word for word from the original comic, which will please fans familiar with the source material. The film tries its best to compensate for its low-budget limitations with gothic atmosphere and blood-soaked action that feels like it came straight out of The Evil Dead. It may not have the jaw-dropping explosions of your average big-budget superhero flick, but it sticks to Hellboy's dark, pulpy roots, offering an experience that's smaller in scale but still manages to make you feel like you're knee-deep in demonic madness. The Crooked Man takes a sharp tonal turn from Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy films. Gone are the whimsical fairy tale elements, no more clockwork armies or lovable fishmen, replaced with gritty American wilderness and a healthy serving of body horror. Comic book purists will probably be thrilled with this shift as it pulls the film closer to Mike Mignola's original vision. But if you're one of those people who enjoy the witty, light-hearted vibe of Del Toro, you might find it jarring. Still, I appreciated that the film tried to do something different and offered us a chance to see a comic book movie stripped of Hollywood excess. Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. And today, we're diving into Hellboy, the Crooked Man.
I've heard tales about him all my life. Most just called him the Crooked Man.
And the crooked things straight.
The movie fills in one of the many unexplored gaps in Hellboy's timeline, taking us straight into his 1950s run-in with witchcraft. It's like watching Hellboy in his early career days, back when the supernatural grind hadn't completely sucked the life out of him, though you'd be hard-pressed to tell, considering he's still about as chipper as a hungover funeral director. We're dropped right into a typical day on the job for Hellboy, with no hand-holding or origin story fluff, which is a bit of a relief. Honestly, the whole day-in-the-life vibe gives off X-Files energy, minus Mulder's obsessive optimism and Scully's constant exasperation. This time, we get a younger, rough-around-the-edges Hellboy during his early stint with the BPRD, with Jack Kesey quipping his way through the supernatural like someone who's seen it all and really just wants a cigarette break.
You getting the heebie-jeebies, friend?
I am the heebie-jeebies.
The southern gothic atmosphere is about as subtle as a hammer to the face, but it works, giving the whole thing a creepy charm that suits the material. Hellboy, partnered with researcher Bobbie Jo's song, is already well established in his paranormal career, sparing audiences the usual backstory and focusing on the immediate supernatural threat. Ron Perlman is understandably the gold standard for Hellboy, yet Kesey's take is its own beast. His version trades some of the brash humor for a more deadpan delivery, but still manages to nail those Hellboy one-liners in a way that feels both world-weary and kind of hilarious.
Oh, you didn't want me to squash?
No, squashing's good.
He's less of a wisecracking drunk uncle and more of a guy who's been there, done that, and really just wants to clock out before the next demonic mess starts. And of course, he's still chain-smoking, because even when you're fighting Appalachian witches, you've got to keep some vices.
I'm fireproof. You're not.
Things quickly go awry when the possessed funnel web spider they were transporting to the BPRD aboard a train is stirred awake. With their train cart derailing and the pair failing to catch the spider, they ponder what awoke it and look in search of a phone.
Something haunted. Evil.
How do you know that?
Dark things called dark things.
Hellboy and Bobbie then stumble upon a local family whose son has been bewitched. Unlike the comic, where Hellboy arrives at the cabin alone, simply wandering in the wilderness, the movie introduces Bobbie as his partner, a character created specifically for the film. The plot thickens as they uncover a centuries-old curse involving witches who've long tormented the region, all under an agent of the devil, appearing in the form of the Crooked Man.
I heard tales about him all my life. Most just called him the Crooked Man.
Also known as Jeremiah Witkins, the Crooked Man is the main villain of both the comic and the film, and he's about as charming as a root canal. His legacy is steeped in the dark folklore of the Appalachian Mountains, where he managed to go from being your everyday greedy sociopath to a full-blown demonic figure after death. You know, career progression. Back when he was alive, Witkins was one of the first settlers in this region of Virginia, in a place charmingly named the Hurricane, which is basically nature's way of saying, don't live here. He was notorious for being a grade-A scumbag, stirring up conflict between settlers and native tribes, and then turning around to sell liquor and weapons to both sides. He kept this hustle going through the American Revolution and the Civil War, raking in a fortune off the misery of others, but his luck ran out and he was eventually hanged for his crimes. His fortune was lost, and so was his chance at ever getting into a halfway decent afterlife. Legend held that the devil himself, impressed by Witkins' heinous deeds, brought him back to Earth as a demonic soul collector, transforming him into the Crooked Man. In his new form, he continued to sow misery and corruption, recruiting local women into witchcraft during their most vulnerable moments. Together with one of his key followers, Effie Kolb, they manipulated the weak and desperate, and Witkins collected the souls of those he corrupted, storing them into glass jars where they appeared as gold coins. Jeremiah retained his ability to manipulate others, driving hard bargains and preying on misery. He was skilled in teaching witchcraft and could grant certain powers such as eternal youth. Witkins also possessed telekinetic abilities, could create illusions, had the power to raise the dead, and made various magical objects. Interestingly, the locals barely react to Hellboy's presence, which is attributed to his recent feature in Life magazine.
Around these parts, I'm not sure which one of us stands out more.
It's the devil come up the road.
As Hellboy and Bobbie investigate further, they're joined by Tom Farrell, a local man with a dark past. Tom reveals that at 15 years old, he was one of Jeremiah's victims, seduced by Effie into performing a satanic ritual to create a lucky wishbone. After completing it, Tom caught a glimpse of the Crooked Man lurking in the woods, which terrified him so much that he vowed never to use the bone's dark power. While never using it for evil, it had protected him from death ever since, keeping him alive during the war and other confrontations. Now he's back, hoping to atone for his past and save Cora Fisher, a young woman he abandoned years ago. Tom's past deal with the devil continues to haunt him, and the group faces increasingly dangerous threats as they battle to undo the curse that has gripped the region.
You hear something?
Your road ends in the dark like mine.
Cora Fisher, once a victim of tragedy after the death of her husband and children, reveals herself to be a witch. At her lowest point, she turned to Effie and the witches under the Crooked Man for help, only to be exploited and driven further into ruin. Effie soon makes her chilling appearance, riding a horse that is soon revealed to be Tom's father, who'd been missing since Tom's departure years ago. Stricken with guilt, Tom vows to bury him on consecrated ground to free his spirit. At this point, it became clear that The Crooked Man was a horror film packed with unsettling imagery and a relentless sense of foreboding, while still maintaining Hellboy's gruff but lovable anti-hero persona. Taylor also integrates some darker contextual backstory that deepens the film's hard-edged atmosphere, staying true to Hellboy's essence.
Let's just keep on coming.
It ain't even really begun.
Joined by Hellboy, Bobbie Jo, and Cora, he leads them toward Reverend Watts' church in the Hurricane, an area infamous for being home to the region's most powerful witches. For Tom, the journey is a quest for redemption. He hopes to cleanse his father's soul, break the witch's hold over Cora, and defeat the Crooked Man once and for all. Along the way, they learn that the witches, bound by their evil powers, are only able to attack at night. Yet the devil, manifesting his dark influence over the area, envelops the region in a sudden supernatural darkness, claiming Cora's body in the process.
That's interesting.
When the group arrives at the church, Reverend Watts explains that while Cora's body had been taken, her soul still remained within the church, offered salvation by God. With the witches eventually surrounding them, the Crooked Man appears, demanding Tom's soul. As the film progresses into its second act, there's a noticeable shift in tone, seemingly drawing inspiration from early John Carpenter films, particularly Prince of Darkness. Both involve characters trapped in a church surrounded by evil forces. The atmosphere here felt oppressive, with everyone, including the blind priest, struggling to resist temptation and sin, while the forces of evil closed in around them. The makeup effects and creature designs, particularly for the Crooked Man, stand out in this sequence, though Taylor's direction does become somewhat erratic, making it harder to stay fully engaged. The limited budget, reportedly around $20 million, significantly less than previous Hellboy movies, does show at times, and visually, the film is a mixed bag. Yet despite these constraints, director Brian Taylor does an okay job with most of the action and supernatural scenes, even if it's not as visually striking as earlier entries. Though the initial siege on the church doesn't go well for Jeremiah, he realizes that many of those buried on the church grounds are sinners, and so he resurrects them, unleashing the undead. While it appears that Tom's soul is the Crooked Man's primary target, it becomes clear that what he truly covets is the wishbone. You see, Tom's refusal to use it for evil has tormented the Crooked Man. In a moment of quick thinking, Reverend Watts blesses the wishbone, transforming it into a holy object. He then consecrates a shovel before handing it over to Hellboy. With it, Hellboy drives away the dark forces, scattering the witches and weakening the Crooked Man. At this point, I need to point out that, having read the comic book, one of the film's main shortcomings is the introduction of Bobbie Jo, a character created for the film. While Adeline Rudolph does her best with the material given, the character feels underwritten and disconnected from the story's time and place. Unlike the other characters who embody the late 1950s setting in both speech and behavior, Bobbie feels like she's been plucked from a modern era and awkwardly inserted into the setting, and her lack of chemistry with Hellboy further weakens her role. The film also somewhat pushes Hellboy into the background, allowing Tom Farrell to take center stage. In this way, Tom carries much of the film's emotional weight, with Hellboy acting more as a supporting figure. While unconventional, this does pay homage to the comic and the Appalachian horror tradition established by writer Manny Wade Wellman, whose character Silver John inspired Tom Farrell. The Crooked Man himself, portrayed as a miserly soul collector sent back from hell, combines modern horror with the devilish charm of Walter Huston's Mr. Scratch from the 1941 film The Devil and Daniel Webster. As I said earlier, the movie did give off an X-Files vibe, and I think if this was a TV show, I wouldn't have minded having Hellboy in the background as a supporting character, especially if his character was being fleshed out over a few episodes. But despite it being ripped out of the comic, seeing Hellboy take so much of a backseat didn't really sit right with me. In contrast to earlier Hellboy films that emphasize fantasy and action, much of the conflict here revolves around spiritual battles and the characters wrestling with tainted souls. While there are physical confrontations, the true struggle is both spiritual and psychological. Unfortunately, despite its many strengths, the film's third act falters, partly due to its major deviation from the comic. What starts as a promising adaptation eventually loses steam, culminating in a somewhat limp finale that fails to capitalize on the film's earlier potential. Hellboy and Tom head to Jeremiah's manor to confront him. Here, Red is subjected to visions of his demonic origin as the son of the demon Azael and the witch Sarah Hughes, while Tom faces off against Steffi, using the wishbone to defeat her. Meanwhile, Bobbie Jo and Reverend Watts venture into the nearby mines via the church, where Watts tragically meets his end. Drawing on her deepest, most painful memories, Bobbie casts a powerful spell that shrinks the demonic spider they encountered earlier in the film, and breaks the curse controlling the region. Simultaneously, Tom throws one of Cora's witch bolts at the Crooked Man, weakening him enough for Hellboy to deliver a final blow. The impact causes the Crooked Man's head to explode in a shower of coins, each representing a soul that he collected. Hellboy then finds a gleaming one and hands it to Tom, symbolizing Tom's release from the Crooked Man's grasp. As they leave the manor, they re-encounter Effie, now aged into an old woman. Tom approaches her, holding the bridle that his father had been forced to wear. As Bobbie and Hellboy leave in a helicopter, the last shot features a white horse with the words, "Beware I'm a witch" painted on it, implying that Effie had been transformed into the animal. When Del Toro brought Hellboy to the screen in the 2000s, he crafted his own vision of Mike Mignola's comic, blending his signature fairy tale sensibilities with the quirky charm of Ron Perlman's Hellboy. The two films were a lot lighter than Mignola wanted them to be, and along with the underwhelming box office performances, is reported as being one of the main reasons Mike and the studio refused to greenlight the third script Del Toro had written. While fans were upset that Del Toro never finished his planned trilogy, it was a 2019 reboot by Neil Marshall that left audiences truly disappointed, a frustration shared by the cast and creative team in the original films, who were clearly deeply wounded they couldn't wrap up their story.
Did you guys see the film? Did you guys enjoy the most recent Hellboy film? What were some of the...
Did you see it, Dick?
I did see it. I wanted to know what we were up with. So, Ron, you did not see it.
I'm a blank slate.
Okay. And that's probably a good thing, probably, yeah. I saw it.
I can still say bad stuff about it, though. I mean,
So, has the Crooked Man improved on the franchise's rocky recent past? Well, it takes a decidedly different approach, but compared to the originals, it's pretty basic. Mignola's Hellboy comics are unique for blending various genres, from fairy tales, superhero stories, to Lovecraftian horror and folklore, and the Crooked Man leans heavily into the latter. The first half is awkward and clunky, struggling to find its footing as it weaves together threads from the comic. However, in the second act, the film picks up speed and the chaos unfolds with frenetic energy. Quick cuts and intense editing stitch together battles between our characters and witches, spiders, ghosts and more, forming a tangled, nightmarish web of supernatural horrors. But it's also messy and uneven, especially in the final act, which, as mentioned earlier, deviates from the comic. While Mignola's involvement with the film keeps it grounded in its comic origin, The Crooked Man clearly suffers from budgetary limitations, lacking the polish and visual grandeur of previous Hellboy films helmed by Del Toro and Marshall. The Crooked Man is a bit rough around the edges, and honestly felt like a bit of a fan film at times. The cinematography, though competent, lacks the visual flair, with much of the action taking place in dark, wooded settings that don't offer much visual distinction. Casting has always been a crucial element for comic book adaptations, and Jack Kesey, stepping into the shoes of Hellboy, had big expectations to meet. I had doubts about him, especially after watching the trailer, but I found his performance quite solid, and despite not having the character's iconic yellow eyes, his Hellboy was one of the best parts of the movie. Although his understated performance lacks the charisma and humor that fans have come to associate with Big Red, Kesey captures Hellboy's world weariness.
Thy rod and thy staff. That'll work.
Joseph Marcel, best known as Jeffrey from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, also brings a bit of energy to the proceedings as Reverend Watts, offering one of the livelier performances in the film.
Every grave in this yard's been dug with this shovel. If it ain't full of God, then nothing is.
Martin Bassendale also brings a grotesque intensity to The Crooked Man, successfully translating Richard Corbin's unsettling comic book designs to the screen.
She suffers so, but I have it in my power to mollify her pain.
While Jefferson White as Tom Farrell brought emotional depth to the character and became the heart of the film. His journey was compelling, and White gave the role a sincerity that grounded the supernatural elements.
Tommy.
That's you, boy. It's you.
When the CGI is at its best, it enhances the supernatural horrors at the heart of the plot, adding an eerie sense of wonder to the dark, folktale-infused narrative. But when it's at its worst, the Crooked Man does lean into B-movie territory. With all that said, I do enjoy B-movies, and I had really low expectations for this and ended up enjoying the Crooked Man for the most part. The film does a good job of maintaining a dark atmospheric tone, and in terms of pacing, the story's tight. There's no unnecessary fluff, just a straightforward plot moving at a brisk pace without feeling rushed or bloated. Additionally, I like the use of practical effects and real-world locations rather than relying heavily on sound stages and green screens. But if I'm being really honest, there really wasn't enough meat on the bones in the comic to warrant a feature, and think that this would have worked well as an episode of a Hellboy TV series. Unfortunately, the movie's limited release, restricted to only a few countries before heading straight to digital soon, will prevent it from being a box office success. I've been arguing for smaller budget films for quite some time, and now that we finally have one, it's a shame it's not going to get the opportunity to make its budget back. Ultimately, Hellboy the Crooked Man is not a masterpiece, nor will it become a critical or commercial success. Yet it embraces the pulpiness, dark humor, and gritty horror that define the comic. Its horror-driven approach, eerie atmosphere, and respect for the source material make it a film worth watching, even with all of its technical faults. In a genre where every film seems to strive for event status, The Crooked Man stands out for its modest approach. It takes risks by embracing a smaller, more personal story rather than world-ending stakes.
Let not your horse be troubled.
Well, that's all for today, folks. A huge thanks to everyone that requested we cover Hellboy the Crooked Man. I just got back from my holiday and am recovering from a cold at the moment, which I'm sure you guys can tell, but I'm planning on upping the content soon, in addition to bringing the FCE podcast back very shortly, so stay tuned for that. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and if there's anything else you'd like for me to cover, please don't hesitate to ask in the comments below. It's Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.
You doubt the power of prayer, son? Just in case.